Good morning, Stacey Ashley here, and it is a cold and windy and rainy Monday morning. The reason that I'm going live this morning is it's been a little while, but also I was having a couple of conversations with people that kind of popped this topic up about onboarding your boss, and so I just wanted to have a really quick chat about that this morning. Let me just check my live state. Welcome if you're live. Great to see you here, and if you're watching the recording, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on this idea of onboarding your boss, so that you can work together effectively, particularly in, interesting times like we have. Now, let me just get rid of this banner because my team will tell me afterwards that I needed to do that. All right, so onboarding your boss. And this is, the reason it came up is one of the programs that I'm running, the 1,000 Leaders Initiative. This is the topic for this week. And so the story goes, quite a long time ago when I was a productivity consultant, I was working with an organisation super focused on helping their leaders to really step up, to create the time and the space to lead. And I was having a conversation with this very senior leader who reported to one of the executive in the organisation. And he was talking about his frustration about where his time went and how he was working not so effectively with his boss. And what he said to me is, my boss just doesn't get my priorities. And for me, I'm like, well, how could this be? Aren't your priorities something that you and your boss talked about? Don't your priorities kind of cascade out of your boss's, vision and strategy? Isn't that how it works? But apparently not. So one of the things that I wanted to just talk about is that, this happens all the time. I see situations where people are doing really great work. They're focusing on what they think is important, and then they discover actually that's not what the expectation was of them. And so the way that they're working with their boss is not that effective. They're not connecting. And then there's, I guess, how they work together or don't work together, how they communicate, when they communicate, how they meet or don't meet, how they exchange information, all of those sorts of things. And so this concept of onboarding your boss is actually about, setting up the way that you're going to work together. And I find that when people come into new roles, so, you might move into a role where you're working for a new boss, or maybe a new boss comes into to where you're already working, or you join a new organization, or, there's lots of iterations of it. But what I find is that there isn't enough in terms of initial conversation to actually set up how are we going to work together. And because we don't do that, we make assumptions, or your boss makes assumptions. You make assumptions about how you work together, how you do decision-making, how you choose what to focus your time and energy on in terms of priorities, how you deal with the people stuff, all those sorts of things. And because you haven't had those conversations, you make these assumptions, and that leads to frustration and disappointment and annoyance and all sorts of things, because your assumptions are different, which is not a surprise. You're different people. And so because your assumptions are different, and that means that your expectations of each other are different. And that leads to frustration, disappointment, annoyance, questions about performance, all sorts of things. And it's not that either of you are doing the wrong thing, but you haven't perhaps done the right thing together by actually having those initial conversations to set yourselves up for success. I remember years ago, I had a great boss, and when I began working for him, he said he wanted a weekly report. So I used to produce a weekly report. And about 9 months in, what I discovered was he wasn't reading my weekly report because there was too much information in it. And so I had put together, I'd spent a lot of time every week putting this report together for him, and he never read it. And so I was super frustrated, and he was disappointed because he wasn't getting what he needed. And if we'd had a conversation about what that report looks like, what level of information needed to be in it, how he wanted it presented, which was just a simple set of traffic lights instead of all the detail I was giving him, we would have, avoided a lot of, wasted effort, because he was then producing his own report instead of using mine, all those sorts of things. So the important thing is when you are working with someone who is, your boss, your leader, your manager, whatever the term is that you use, that you need to really think about how do you want to work together, and you need to have the conversations that allow you to agree how you are going to work together. So don't assume, actually have conversations and set expectations with each other. You can always revisit them if they're not working, but you need to open up the conversation. Otherwise, we simply assume and we set ourselves up for disappointment. I hear from a lot of people, they get really frustrated with their bosses because maybe they don't have one-on-ones with them frequently enough. Maybe they don't get enough feedback. Maybe they're unsure about what their performance is actually like and what they need to change or improve or how they could develop. It's up to you. If you want a good, effective, constructive working relationship with your boss, then you need to drive that. So I would love to know what you think of that concept, but I'd also like to know, what are your tips for getting that relationship either off on the right foot so that you're working effectively together, or how do you redress it if you've been working with someone for a while and it's not quite working as you would like it to, and how do you change that? How do you reposition it? How do you reframe that? Now, for me, again, I would say go back to those conversations, and really get things out in the open so you can figure out the way forward. But I'd love to know from your perspective, what do you think? What suggestions do you have about, how do you create, the opportunity for you and your leader to work really effectively together? Hey, Zoe, good to see you here. I can just see your comments popped up. I'm assuming the valid point that people don't actually have the conversations. I agree. There's so much opportunity for us to have those conversations and we just don't. And I get that people are super busy, and that they need, to be focused on lots of different things. But if you want to be effectively focused and know that you're actually focused on the right things, you need to have that conversation in the first place. So really, really key to your performance, to your boss's performance, to your team's performance, and satisfaction and sense of achievement and all of those sorts of things, that you have those initial conversations and ongoing conversations with your boss to actually, get on the same page. So deliberately onboard your boss so that both know and agree to how you're going to work together. Anyway, I would love to know what you think. Love to know any suggestions you have for making that happen and making that a really useful and valuable process. And if you need to have that conversation, I would say, it's important to have it sooner rather than later, because the sooner you can get rid of assumptions and actually agree expectations, the sooner you're setting yourself and your boss up for a much more successful working relationship. So have a great week, and I will talk to you again soon.